Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
I want kids and I want people to understand that if you come from an immigrant background, if you don't have any money, if you don't think you have any talent, if you were bullied, if you were in an environment that was not conducive towards your needs, or you feel like you weren't even compatible with that, you can still make something out of your life.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Mark Metry. Mark is the host of Humans 2.0, a top 100 podcast where he interviews billionaires, New York Times bestselling authors, and other legendary world-class human beings. In total, his thoughts, views, podcasts, and videos have been viewed over 2.5 million times. He's been marketing online for over 10 years, since the age of 11, and helps companies understand and strategize what to do on social media to get their message heard authentically in the age of vanity metrics. He's also the founder of VU Dream, a virtual and augmented reality marketing and advertising agency based in Boston. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's such an honor to be here. And thank you to everyone out there for tuning in.
Thank you, Mark. I've been listening to yours as well, and I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today to tell your story. So today you're a successful podcast host and an entrepreneur, but I understand from hearing you tell your story on your podcast and through social media that when you were younger, you really struggled with shyness and anxiety. So could you tell me more about what that experience was like and how you worked to overcome your shyness and anxiety to start realizing your full potential?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up as a kid, my parents came from Egypt and they immigrated to the United States a year before I was born. They didn't know the language. They came with just like a couple $100. And, in turn, I kind of saw all of that happen. And, I had a fantastic childhood, but, at its same time, it had its challenges. I had great parents, that loved me very much, and I loved them. Through really seeing their, immigrant hustle, I was really able to build a sense of work ethic and purpose because I saw my dad and my mom come to this country, not know anybody, and do this for, the sake of their children's future. So I saw that going on, and that was amazing. And, in turn, and not having any money really, that led me to being a really resourceful kid. So, I have memories at the age of 7 of me like going through newspapers and cutting out different baseball players in the sports section and gluing those with a bunch of other papers to try to mimic like real trading cards. And eventually I got pretty good at that I was able to actually sell those and get the real money to be able to buy the real baseball cards and some other things. So I was always that kind of kid. But at the same time, I had some, different health issues, like just various autoimmune disorders, anything too serious, but, it led me to be tired. And, some of the schools that we ended up traveling around to, I remember this one in particular, it was in Western Massachusetts. And, everyone at that school, I'm not racist or anything, but everyone at that school was white. There was not any sort of diversity. It was like maybe me and, maybe one other black person. But for the most part, everyone looked the same. And looking back at that now, I've learned that, our primitive brain can, especially combined with some other things like various health issues, make us feel like we're isolated, we're alone, nobody can relate to us. We're just kind of living in our own sort of sphere. And in turn, I ended up developing some really severe social anxiety and, not just the kind of, oh, you're nervous to talk to somebody or, you don't want to do something by yourself or anything. But for me, it just really placed a lot of boundaries on my social life. And I had just at that young of an age, even though I'm still a young guy today, I had so many different regrets of things that I could have done, I should have done, but I didn't because I was too afraid. I had a fear of social humiliation, this, and that. And in turn, since I had all those fears, I ended up turning towards the internet, ended up turning towards technology and video games. And, by the age of 10, I really just started to go online. I saved up enough money to buy myself a laptop and eventually an iPhone, started learning online, started to develop how to code, how to make apps, websites, just things along like that, take even some primitive courses way back when. And I ended up just starting a YouTube channel because I played a lot of video games and I became the best out of my friend group. And, I said, hey, I'm going to teach people some of these tips and tricks online so they can get better at this video game. And I did this in about 2011. 2012, when YouTube was not really super evolved today, where you have, people that have millions of subscribers and people are starting gigantic businesses and empires off that. And everyone is watching YouTube videos. But at the time, it wasn't really mainstream. So that just kind of perpetuated my social anxiety even more. And I would say the other, pivotal moment for me was I started to play this video game when I was 14, 15 called Minecraft. And, I got on there because of a friend wanted me to play. And the first day that I got on there, my friend and I, we joined this multiplayer server where you can just go on there with your friends and hang out with other people and play these different games within the game of Minecraft. And I went on the server and I was like, wait, what is this? It's lagging. It sucks. I just saw so many different areas of improvement. So literally that day, I just started Googling on how to start my own Minecraft server. And, to keep the story short, it basically became one of the top Minecraft servers in the world. I went from somebody who, didn't have any money to, making some dollars here and there from the things I was learning online, from even YouTube, to making just an obscene amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars at the age of 15, when I really didn't come anywhere near that background. And, the reason why I'm telling you the story now is, it helped me learn a lot of different things. In turn, I ended up managing a remote team of over 40 people. All the different quote unquote marketing tactics that I was doing were just things that were intuitive to me. And to be honest with you, I didn't even know what that word meant just until a few years ago. Marketing, entrepreneurship, and all those words that we use now. But really what I ended up realizing is when I came from that background of sort of the pursuit of the American dream of just hustle. And then once you get this 6-figure job or once you get this salary or this and that, then sort of all your problems go away. And I was 15 at the time and I made that money. And I was like, wait, but the story in my head that I was telling myself still didn't change. I still thought of myself as a loser. And I just started looking around here and I saw all my other friends, they were talking about how they were going to major in this thing to go to this college to get this job, this 6-figure salary, this, that. And I already had that. So that was maybe one of the first times in my life where I just sort of stopped in my tracks. And I was like, wait, maybe the money, all these things that I'm unconsciously chasing, the way that society, my narrative, my upbringing was taking me, maybe that's not the actual purpose and goal of life. So basically I have that and I kind of used it as a crutch in a lot of different ways, but it also benefited me a lot. And, kind of moving on from this, when I was 18, 19, I ended up falling down this pretty depressive spiral. Going back in my life, depression wasn't really a big part of it. It was mostly anxiety, but I just started to really feel hopeless. And the thought of the future will not be better. And looking back at that now, I really realized that it was because I wasn't using my energy. I wasn't using my potential. I didn't have a purpose. One of my good friends, Bedros Keuilian, he talks about the story of, I believe it's German Shepherds, but it's basically this kind of dog that's made to shepherd sheep and bring them around. And basically with this dog, if it does not have an assigned job to do, it'll basically just run around and it'll dig random holes in the ground. And eventually it'll become depressed and die.
Wow.
And I learned that with humans, we're sort of the same way. So I didn't have an outlet to sort of point myself in. And especially because I was coming from a background where, I did X, Y, and Z when I was 15, when I was 13 years old. So I definitely knew the talent and the potential was there, but I wasn't really doing anything with it. So I kind of experienced all of this resistance, all of this uncomfortableness. And in turn, I just kind of go down this dark spiral, where I gain a tremendous amount of weight. I start doing things that I normally wouldn't do. I end up becoming more depressed, just kind of like a horrible lifestyle of kind of like laying in bed, just hopeless until like 4 a.m. And then waking up at 8 a.m., chugging Red Bulls, eating a bunch of sugary processed things, not spending my time with the best of people, not doing the best of things. And, it took me about like a year to actually realize this, like towards the end of, when I had turned 19. And it was really just like a time of where I ended up traveling a little bit. I ended up going back to my parents' place. I got a lot of perspective. I started to dive into the world of health because I wanted to lose my weight. I ended up going into the state called ketosis, which is basically when your brain is no longer fueled by glucose, but it transitions and it's purely fueled by ketones, which is this kind of energy that your brain creates from eating fat. So I really just went on like this really great lifestyle diet thing, stopped eating any of the processed things, started to eat a lot of whole foods like vegetables and fruits and meats and eggs and nuts and things like that. And, when I did that, I started to get more energy. I started to sleep normally for the first time in my life. I started to exercise. I started to meditate. I started to journal things down. I started to surround myself with proper people. I started to become more grateful. And that really ended up changing my state of being. And when that happened, I just looked around and I just had so much energy. I ended up starting this business as a sort of spiritual conquest for me to reach for something, to not be, weighed down in my excuses or my shortcomings, and to really reach for something that's bigger than myself. And, after I started that business at the end of 2016, mid 2017, last year, I ended up starting my podcast, the Humans 2.0 podcast. It's just sort of an extensuation of that concept of just saying like, hey, Mark, you've been taking a lot of stock in your life. You've been pursuing this really drastic change. You've been doing a bunch of amazing things, but at the same time, I had also been running into a lot of different issues. Like my business wasn't really working. I ran into some more problems with my physical, mental health, and just a wide variety of things. So I started the podcast, the Humans 2.0 podcast, as a way for me to seek or to ask some questions to the greatest minds on planet Earth in order to get the answers that I need in order to create the results in my own life. And, today, the podcast is a top 100 podcast. I do business with startups all over the world to Fortune 500s. I wake up every day and I'm just completely blessed, and I'm really just living my ideal version of my perfect life. And I wouldn't be doing anything else at all except for this. So that's kind of sort of my story. And I'm really just doing this because I want kids and I want people to understand that if you come from an immigrant background, if you don't have any money, if you don't think you have any talent, if you were bullied, if you were in an environment that was not conducive towards your needs, or you feel like you weren't even compatible with that, you can still make something out of your life. So that's like the ultimate message that I'm trying to spread. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. I know that was kind of a long tangent, but that's that.
Well, that's incredible. And listening to you tell your story, one thing I'm really struck by is that you were not afraid to kind of jump in and try things that you you weren't familiar with. So you were open to learning. Because I feel like a lot of times when you're younger, you're given the message of, okay, you go to school and you study this, and then you get a job in this, and that's how you're allowed, or you get permission to try this sort of thing. But, now at the age of the internet and so many resources, there's, Google searching how to make a Minecraft server. Like that information's out there. And really anyone who wants to put in the focus and the hard work and invest the time and the energy can do anything, like even podcasting. You don't have to go to school for this. And here we are doing podcasts. So it's all about, what you want to learn. And I think that that's an incredible message as well for people, is that things have changed. It's not, you don't have to go to special schools or do special jobs to be allowed to do certain things. It's really just your potential is unlimited if you're really focused on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, I think the big thing was having an innate sense of curiosity. And that curiosity may come from having great life circumstances, and it also might come from having not so great life circumstances, like being an immigrant and your environment teaching you to be resourceful. So I think I definitely had that playing. But, Caroline, one thing you said is, I wasn't afraid. Yeah. I mean, for some things I just wasn't conscious of. And, I've learned that the way that my brain processes things is kind of chaotic. Like I have to learn by actually doing things. I can't learn by like hearing it or thinking about it. It's just not the way that my brain works. So I think I had that going for me. But really in terms of fear, the main thing was I had like reached this point where I had become aware, like when I was 18, 19, become aware of my social anxiety and the boundaries that it placed in my life. And that plunged me into this mode of, I think I heard Will Smith say this, but the only thing that you should be afraid of is fear itself. Yeah. So I like went through this moment, like this period of time where I was sorting myself out and I was becoming aware of this. And I ended up writing down all the things that I was afraid of. And the reason why is I just hit this tipping point of like being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like this was the reason why I was depressed. I wasn't living the life that I was actually meant to live because I had built this cage inside of my own mind. So like once I started to understand that, I literally just went on this quest, this conquest of just, I don't want to say purging, but of just like habitually, consistently just going all out and just destroying my fear. So in terms of social anxiety, I would literally wake up in the morning. I would like do a bunch of the practices that I had talked to you about before, like meditation, journaling, writing things down, having a morning routine. And then I would literally just walk around the street. And my main goal was just to start conversations with people that I didn't know. And at first it was terrifying, but that was a way for me to immerse myself and totally eliminate my fear. And I had a wide variety of fears, but I think for me, social anxiety was the biggest one. And like that did not come from me being fearless. That came from me being in a state of just being sick and tired of being sick and tired, like just having enough of it and just saying like, this fear has enough power over me and it has its hand over my neck, but the desperation and maybe even the courage that I have to be able to go to a next level, to be able to like create something else that's in my next level, that was more of a compelling reason and a purpose and a why for me to actually start tackling that fear. So I think that's like one of the big takeaways from this. And like, I interview a lot of people on my podcast, and one of the main misconceptions is that these people do not fear fear. Yeah. They don't have doubts. They don't have insecurities. And what I've learned is that they actually all have them. That's what makes us human. But the main separation is people that take action despite those thoughts. And I think that's really the kind of mental space that I've had to put myself in. And I'm doing it today, whether it's from, like doing different business things to now I'm like doing different speaking engagements at conferences to, just a wide variety of things that, scare me. Like at the next week, I'm going to New York City to be interviewed by Forbes. Wow. Next month, I have this gigantic business meeting with some of the biggest clients I've ever had, making the most amount of money that I've ever made in my life. And some of it is terrifying, but it's just like having that reason to be able to do it anyway and persevere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an important clarification. It's not that people don't have fear. It's that you find a way to not let the fear stop you from moving. Either there's something else that's stronger, that's moving you forward. Like you said, you were sick and tired of being sick and tired, or you just find ways to say, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Bingo.
Yeah. Wow. So, you went through this amazing transformation, and you may have alluded to it a little earlier, but was there like a turning point where you had that realization of, I'm going to change my life because I really am sick and tired of being sick and tired? Or was it more of a gradual realization, or was there like one point in time that everything changed in the way you were thinking about it?
Yeah, yeah. And, Caroline, I love these sorts of questions because it's like, really, if we want to think about it, like, it took me a full 19 years to kind of, lead up the moment. But for me, the main sort of moment that really just sticks out is November 8th, 2016. So in about June, July, August, that was when I told you I had done some traveling. I spent some time with my parents. I got some perspective. I got a separation for me to really look at my thoughts. And that was also a time where I had just started to read a lot of different books, listen to a lot of podcasts, start to become aware of a lot of the terms that we talk about today, like, growth mindset, adaptability, responsibility, all these different sorts of things. So I kind of had that going in the background of my brain. And it was also a time where, like I said, I had actually started to get my health, my nutrition, my physical exercise, my sleep together right for the first time in my life. So I had those things going. And I had started to pick up meditation in about like towards the end of October. And I did meditation. I just downloaded the app Headspace. I started to do it. On the first day that I did it, I felt a change. I really could not point my finger on it back then, but I had just kept on doing meditation every day. And about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, I don't know what it was, but, I remember I had come back from the day. It was around like 2 or 3. I came back. I was tired. I ended up just going to my bed, taking a nap. And I remember waking up from my nap and, I was in the middle of like half of my dream state, half of my awake state. So I wasn't really woken up yet. I was just kind of in between there. And I don't know what it was. It was a whisper. It was, maybe you call it my intuition, my real self. And I just had like this overwhelming sense of and feeling of, Mark, if you don't get up and do this, you're never going to change. And this was important because this was a time where I had started to make the steps in my life. I had started to eat healthy. I had started to get my lifestyle together. I had started to read a bunch of books about mindset and business and wealth and all these different things. I had started a morning routine. I had started meditating, but I wasn't really like 100% in that mode. I was still half pregnant. I had one foot on, the old version of Mark, and I had another foot on like the new person that I was trying to be. Mm-hmm. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, dude, if you don't go 100% at this, you're literally never going to make this. And you're just going to end up like going back to your old ways and just living your life like everybody else. So I just got up and I just went out the door. And in my mind, just like the idea that came to me was just walking to Target to go and buy a whiteboard. And I'm walking there and, I don't know what it was. Oh, and it's probably a good thing to say this, but I had also started, this lifestyle diet that I had talked to you about. And I went into this state called ketosis. And that was the first time I went into ketosis. And for those of you that don't know, what happens is when you go into ketosis, you get peak mental clarity. You get, in some cases, peak performance. And it's literally beyond anything I could possibly describe to you guys. But I wanted that for the first time in my life. And I don't know, maybe that was it. Maybe it was me eating a lot of the right things and me thinking properly. Maybe it was me meditating, but I'm just like on this walk and I'm just like having this, now that I'm looking back at it, I call it like, the path of my revelation, where I'm just like in my walk, I'm just like connecting so many dots in my life. I'm becoming aware of like all of the events that I had done as a kid, all of the things that happened to me, like the Minecraft serve that I made, the YouTube thing, this and that. And then like some of the bad things that I had done and some of the, supposed bad things that had happened to me. And it was just like this overwhelming moment of understanding. And the main realization was that like none of these things have actually happened to me. I was actually the person that was making all of these things happen. And it wasn't the fault of my parents. It wasn't the fault of my race. It wasn't the fault of my environment. It wasn't the fault of my gender or the government, or like I wasn't doing this because of that. And it was really like this first time moment in my life where I started to take ownership and I started to take responsibility, because I realized that life reality is just a reflection of whatever's inside of your mind. That's really the entire story. That's the way it's worked for hundreds of thousands of years. So I discovered this, and it really just plunges me into a whole nother world where this kind of becomes my dominant operating system. And to me, this is like the line in the sand. And, just like I told you before, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from there, but from that point on, my mental operating system was just switched 180 degrees. And it was really the line in the sand for me. So that was a moment. And then it was only like 2 weeks after that, I got the idea to start my business. And it was 2 weeks after that I actually ended up launching my business. And that just set me into a continued path of just taking action, getting up in the morning at 5, 6 a.m., even if you don't feel like it. Because, for me, I realized that business was just a primary engine that I had used for my entire life. And the skills that I had built, I just happened to be born in this unique time where those were at demand. So for me, starting a business was a way for me to really push myself and really just to not get me in my old complacent, comfortable ways. So when I started that business and when I had really just pushed myself to move forward, it's really amazing. Like for me, like I don't even know how to describe it, but it was just kind of like Rocky in the movie where you just see like this time lapse of him just like waking up every single day and running and like going to the gym. Like that's what it was for me. And like when I look back at that now, it was just, the greatest gift that I know for decades to come. That's going to be the moment where, I tell my kids and eventually I tell my grandkids, like that's where I actually made a decision for the first time in my life to actually create my own life path.
Wow, that's amazing and really freeing at the same time because now you have every possibility in front of you. Awesome. Wow. So, of course, as part of that, after you started your new business, and then you also started this new podcast called Humans 2.0. So first, what is a Human 2.0? And then what inspired you to start a podcast about that topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So looking back at it now, in June of 2017, the idea, like the name of it, Humans 2.0, just came in my head. I wish I could tell you how or the reasoning behind it, but there really was nothing. The main kind of idea that I was trying to bring is there's a next level to us humans. And at the same time, there's also a next level of us when it comes to technology and the current way that our society is and the world is moving. So to me, a human 1.0 is somebody that I was before. Like that person I just described to you is somebody that never took responsibility for their life, was kind of just like a fish swimming in water that in its own mind was just being pushed around by the waves. No responsibility, always blaming things on other people, their circumstances, their environment, not taking any sort of ownership and really vigor to create their own life, versus a human 2.0, which is somebody that, has lived one version of their life and understood that there's an alternative. There is another mode of being. And it's somebody in my eyes that does take responsibility and that does make the decisions and choices based on their own present standard. Really what it is they're living from the inside out. So like I remember when I was a kid, I was always reacting. I was always living from the outside in. Whenever people told me to do something, I would do it. But that main shift is when I started living my life inside out. And I started to really just become aware of my own dreams and my own vision and my own thoughts and prioritize those over what anybody else thinks of me or does that. And the main thing is, and why I think this is so important is, I think all of us are born into this world with some sort of a dream. I think all of us are strategically designed and plan to do something for our specific task in this world. And what ends up happening is we end up conforming because we hear other people talk to us. It could be our parents. It could be our teachers. It could be, somebody with the best intentions of you, but they go in your mind and they pollute your dream. And what ends up happening is you, depending on how much you listen to these voices, you end up not even being able to differentiate your own voice, your intuition versus other people's opinions and thoughts. And when you do have this dream, this destiny living inside out, you end up persevering all of that crap. You end up going against that, and you're like, I don't care what other people think or say because I'm busy doing this. Yep. So that to me is what a human 2.0 is all about. And then also a human 2.0, I mentioned a little bit in terms of the technology. Like for me, technology has just been a major part of my life. I've definitely abused it in some cases, but at the same time, like it lifted me and like my entire family out of poverty when I was 15 years old. Wow. And I don't think people really like understand this. I think a lot of us just put technology in these boxes like, oh, my iPhone or social media or emails or this and that. But really, like, it's just opened up this entire, web of communications that's fundamentally changed the way that we operate. And, I'm in the school of thought that says, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, the decisions that we make today is really going to shape the rest of human history. And when you take a look at what's going on with various exponential technologies like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, 5G, blockchain, it's going to fundamentally change literally the way that we do everything. And I think even change the mode of our existence. Mm-hmm. And just like for some quick examples, I interviewed this guy on my podcast named Naveen Jain. He owns a company called Moon Express. That's the only private company in the world that's allowed to leave Earth's orbit. They're mining resources from the moon. They're making that an interplanetary species. And at the same time, he also has another company here on Earth called the Viome that has basically the world's smartest scientists. It has the head of AI at IBM, and they've created this functional microbiome test that, long story short, is basically going to make chronic illness like heart disease, dementia, even things like depression, anxiety, obesity, even all of those things are going to be optional. I interviewed another guy on my podcast named Brian Johnson. He runs this thing called OS Fund. I believe it's almost $1 billion fund that is literally made to decide and to incubate various startups that are redefining the very operating systems of our lives. And at the same time, he has another company called Kernel. I believe it's a $500 million venture-backed thing that he kind of started on his own that's augmenting human brain intelligence. So I think once we start looking at it from that perspective, a human 2.0 is, not only somebody who believes that they can go to the next level, but also somebody that has this kind of conscious awareness of what technology really is. And in my opinion, technology is just a wave of evolution that's been started and created by humans. If you look at the moment that we discovered fire, that technology, that freed up our cognitive brain resources to be able to invent other things like culture and religion. The moment we created tools, we began to eat new different forms of food, which changed our very physiology and changed what we do here on this earth. And really, I think technology has, sort of made us human in a way. Like, I think that is actually the ultimate thing. And, just to kind of like put a cap and sort of, end this kind of human 2.0 movement, part of the podcast philosophy is to use technology, to not let it use you, which kind of goes back to the mindset, the internal stuff inside of you, because that's ultimately our brains. They are the ultimate technology. And you can abuse technology, whether it is, your Instagram feed or maybe even your thoughts, maybe even certain people, food, all these different things we can abuse. So I just think it's looking at it from, that kind of conscious perspective of, okay, this is going to happen no matter what. So how can we get on the best front of this and use it to solve all the world's problems?
Wow. Yeah, so that's really transformative. And you mentioned some of your guests that you've had on your show. You've had tons of human 2.0 of people who are really significantly changing the world as we know it. How do you select and get in contact with your guests? And how did you pick your very first guests? And then how has that selection process changed over time?
Thank you so much for asking that. I love telling other podcast hosts this, but so I basically started my podcast, just like I told you. I got the idea for it in June. I finally ended up launching it towards the end of August.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could tell you that was me busy planning away, but really I just got in my own head again. And I started to get all these doubts like, wait, why would somebody listen to my podcast when they can listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast or Joe Rogan's podcast or any of these people? So I had that at first, and I got my first few guests by just reaching out to people that were in my industry, which is virtual reality. So I just started off with the people that were sort of my friends, like my highest profile friends. So I would say about the first 10, 12, 14 episodes were just people that I knew, people that were in my industry, people that I had direct and immediate access to. And then what happened was, once I sort of built that credibility in a way, then I started to reach out to other people and I said, hey, I had this podcast called Humans 2.0. I've had on 15 guests, and I remember I would list all the guests out. Not that anybody knew them or anything. And I would just reach out to them, and a lot of people said no. A lot of people said yes. I get some emails today of people that I reached out to when I was first starting off my podcast that either said no or just completely ignored. And they see that I have a top 100 podcast now. And they're like, dude, can I please come back on your show? And, that's that. But really what I would say, my main piece of advice is look at somebody who, you want to interview, and go online and do a little bit of digging in and see where they live. And what I mean by that is some people, when they're online, some of them spend most of their time on Twitter, or for some people it's Instagram, or for some people it's LinkedIn. For some people it's neither, and it's just email. So for me, it's looking at that and saying, okay, what is the best way to get in touch with these people? Because maybe, if you hit them up on LinkedIn, which is a much less saturated channel versus somebody that's popular on Instagram, you're probably going to get a response back. And in terms of, finding who to interview, for me, it's just an unbelievably simple process, because I've never gone out there and Googled who should I have on my podcast, or I've never scrounged for podcast guests. Because the way that I get guests on my show is, I'm just constantly somebody that's always learning, which means I'm always reading books. I'm always watching TED Talks. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm always talking to other people. I'm always posting content on the internet, on social media. And when I see somebody else that I learn from, I just shoot them an invite and I say, hey, I've got this podcast now. And, it's obviously much easier for me to get guests now that it's sort of well established. But yeah, that's what I tell people. I think that's the ultimate way. Caroline, I'll tell you this great story for me. For me, this was a big shift in the way that I started to interact with my guests. And this really took my podcast to the next level. So August 1st, so this is a couple months ago, I interviewed this guy named Jeremy Ryan Slate. He's a totally normal dude. Now he's got one of the top podcasts like me. He's also had a business. And I interviewed this guy, and I really just realized how a normal dude was able to take his podcast to the next level, which in turn really built up his influence, his brand, to a lot of other areas in his life. So I saw that, and I remember he ended up telling me, oh yeah, I ended up sending an email to Seth Godin 300 times. And he said that he would only come on after I hit 400 episodes. And for whatever reason, I was just really inspired. So later that day, I emailed Seth Godin. And, I had obviously read a lot of his books. And for those of you that don't know, Seth Godin is basically one of the most prolific writers and authors of our time. He's basically the king when it comes to communications and business and marketing in terms of books. But I sent him an email, and I just spent 2 hours writing this. And I really just I didn't use an email template online or anything like that. I just kind of wrote it from the heart. And I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing it for this reason. This is how I'm doing it. This is my future endeavors. I sent him that email, and in 20 minutes, he responds back and he's like, yeah, Mark, let's do it tomorrow.
Wow.
So I went from a day where I interviewed Jeremy that morning. I emailed Seth later in the afternoon. I interviewed him the next day in the morning. So I landed an interview with Seth Godin in under 24 hours from when it came in my mind. So when I saw that very real-time progression, I was like, holy crap, I'm thinking too small on this podcast. And so that was August 1st. In the middle of August, that's when it hit the top 100 list. And because after I got on Seth Godin, I just started to think down this path. And then I started to invite other people that I had just always looked up to, but I was always afraid. And believe it or not, a lot of them end up saying yes, like just an unbelievable amount. Just some people that I can like just sort of kind of line off here that I've learned a lot from and that are 100% confirmed coming on my podcast. So like I had that Naveen Jain, I reached out to him like a day after I landed the Seth Godin interview. I'm interviewing this other guy named Ed Milet. He's one of the top 50th wealthiest people under 50. Gretchen Rubin, David Goggins, Jordan Harbinger, Beth Comstock, Jocko Willink, Don Jose Ruiz, John Lee Dumas, Garen Jones, Ryan Serhant, just really just unbelievable people that I just always looked up to and read their books. And I'm having the pleasure of having them on my podcast. And that for me was like one of the biggest recent breakthroughs that I recently went through, to be like, oh, wow. So like I had really been tripling down on my podcast, but I reached this moment where, you know, my own efforts and my own podcast was not the thing limiting me. It was just my mindset. And I definitely think there's a lot of work that you need to do. Like up to that point, I had already made the Humans 2.0 podcast a daily show. And I had been really, really hustling down and really just grinding it out. But that to me was like one of the biggest breakthroughs that really just changed the course of my podcast.
Wow, that's incredible. And that reminder to really think big, and that most of us probably are thinking too small because, you know, we're afraid that we'll never reach this big, audacious goal. But if you don't strive for it, you know, you're not going to get anywhere near it. And even if you get close to it, you're still way far ahead of where you would have been if you were just thinking small.
Yeah, absolutely. And after my interview with Naveen Jain, that really just reaffirmed that fact more, because I saw a guy who, you know, lived in the slums of India for the beginning of his life. Sometimes his family didn't have food. They would walk around from village to village. He came to the United States really just out of luck. And in less than 2 years, he became a billionaire, and he's going to the moon and he's going to space. And really just by seeing that analogy, that just really reaffirmed it in my head of, oh, okay, so maybe the thing that is limiting me is my vision, is my dream. And, you know, that's just pushed me to go further and further and further and further. And it's really just, like I said, like I'm just unbelievably grateful. And I'm glad that all the conversations that I have, I can put them up on my podcast. And, you know, that's something I admire about you, Carolyn, too, is, you know, we're not only learning through these great conversations, but we're also putting it out there for other people to learn if they have that kind of desire. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the biggest things that's like helped me and pushed me going ever since my podcast started to really take off. Like I've had the great fortune and blessing of like waking up every day to like hundreds of messages on my email, on my LinkedIn, on my Instagram of people just saying like unbelievably specific things like, hey, Mark, I, you know, listened to your podcast, episode 40. And when you talked to your guest and when you guys talked about that, that really made me think differently. And, you know, that made me do this, and that. And I listened to your advice. And, you know, now I'm, you know, doing this and that. And now my relationship with my mom is better and this and that. Wow. And like that to me has been another fundamental driving factor. It's really just reaffirmed in my head is, you know, what you do on an individual basis, whether you have a podcast or you don't, it really affects the people around you. And for me, a big thing is just like thinking like, okay, what's good for me now, today? What's good for me a year from now, 10 years from now? And also at the same time, not only that, but what's also good for the people around me 10 years down the road. So, you know, that's why I think having a podcast is just so fundamental. And to be honest with you, I don't even think it's started yet. I don't even think we've hit the peak of podcasts. And I think it's
definitely not.
It's just beginning. And like a gigantic thing that I've noticed is you have no idea who's listening to your podcast. Mm-hmm. I really started to learn this when I interviewed this guy that's a founder at the startup. And after the interview ended up going live, I got like 10 emails from different VCs, investors that said, hey, Mark, I've been listening to your podcast for a while. That startup that you interviewed their founder, they're actually one of my investments, or like I have their pitch deck waiting in my inbox right now. So that's really enabled me to understand the power of podcasting, because you're basically in people's ear, whether they're commuting, whether they are in their car, and that yields extraordinary value in a world where there's more people creating content than ever. Like, I don't know if you use Instagram or not, or LinkedIn, but it's like, do you remember the 16th post that you scroll by today? Probably not.
Not likely, unless I stopped on it by chance, but probably not.
Exactly. But versus, a 40-minute conversation with two real human beings, that's just fundamental. So I think podcasts are really game changers, not only in terms of the online marketing influence branding, but also from the terms of like human evolution. I know for me, a great way that I've been learning about mindset and different tools that I've really been able to make a fundamental difference in my life is by listening to podcasts, because they're a passive form of consumption. Like, I was never really per se a reader, but putting something in my ear and just listening for me is much easier. So I think podcasts are just such a fundamental game changer in every aspect of life. And I think it's just going to keep on going. And for those of us that understand that, I think we're going to be, the next Fox News, the next MSNBC. I think that's really where the world is heading, in a more decentralized media communication center, because everyone is different. Not everyone likes the same sorts of things. And when you align yourself with those kinds of people, that's when you can really get results. Like, I'm just thinking, like, imagine if I heard all this mindset stuff, like how to meditate and food and like how to control your breath and different, all these things when I was like 7 years old. You know what I mean? So like, just imagine that kind of world then versus the kind of world that we're living in right now. I know that was just kind of a random note, but I mean,
no, it's true. But podcasts, and it's all this amazing content, and it's free and it's easily accessible. There's so many different ways to get it. And I know for me personally, I live in the New Jersey, New York area. So I have a long commute by car. So I can't do anything else but listen to things. So I listen to podcasts. So I'm a captive audience for a good 2 hours a day. So I get all my listening in there. Otherwise, it's wasted time. So it's exciting for me as a listener to listen at that time.
And you've got 2 hours. You said that's the only thing that you can do, or else it's a waste of time. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And just on another dimension of that, you are whatever you end up feeding your mind with. So if you put on like a random radio station and you're subject to listen to whatever, whether it's music, whether it's the producer talking or whatever it is, that's actually going to end up creating your thoughts later down the road. But what if you could put in an inner dialogue of the world's most successful people, or maybe there's like a problem that you're struggling with and you can start to get more information about that. And that eventually starts to become your mindset. So I think it's just unbelievably powerful in that sense too.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about, we think about nutrition and you are what you eat, but you are who you surround yourself with, what you listen to. All of that plays into it. Absolutely. You had shared that you never know who's listening to your podcast, and you get messages from people who are inspired by what your guests are saying, or it's changed their life, or you've gotten business opportunities and things. And I know as a podcaster myself that even having my podcast, it's really changed parts of my life that I wasn't even expecting or planning for it to. So I'm curious to know from you, how has the Humans 2.0 podcast changed your life?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So really, I would say the biggest thing is, and this is sort of relatable to starting a business or starting an organization, but it's really put me in this feedback loop that's bigger than myself. Just like I said, I get the unbelievable opportunity to, not only conversate with some of the world's greatest people that are still alive today, but I'm also able to talk to people that listen to that podcast and are affected. So it's kind of put me in this space of just like being a machine of just constantly upgrading, constantly doing the best that I can do, constantly trying to figure out how to go to that next level, whether it's in terms of my personal, my spiritual, my health, my business, all of these different things. So really the biggest thing is it's just put me in that system. Like I am Mark and I am an individual, but it's just put me in the system where, I think the embodiment of a human 2.0. And that's not to say I don't have problems. That's not to say I don't have issues or things that I struggle with, because I do in every single moment. But it's just put me in the system in the same way that I described to you before of making a business to push myself to do things. It's also put myself in that position. And now I'm getting the unbelievable opportunities on the business side and also, the different speaking side. Like, I was recently at Manhattan College in New York City on a panel with the head of strategy at Microsoft. And I'm really able to sort of use myself as a channel to give information and potentially value to other people. Like a big thing is, I see a lot of podcasters that sort of become entitled. They start to start living inside of their own head. They start to think, oh, the reason why people listen to my podcast is because of me. And that's sort of true. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I just view myself as a channel. And I'm a person here that's conducting these things for other people to learn from. And I'm just a participant in that. And, Caroline, when I'm able to get on the front lines and have a conversation with somebody like Seth Godin or this and that, I'm able to take that information, really apply it in my own life and just bring myself to a next level. So there's been a lot of change that's been happening to me every single month. And sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing to do. But at the end of the day, after every level, so to speak, I always look back and I'm like, man, thank God that happened. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And just having these perspectives from all these different conversations, to be honest, I really think has just made me like almost a force of nature. I really try to take some intellectual humility when I'm talking on the podcast. Like I really make sure to not convey that I know everything. And that my main goal in the podcast and why I think it's actually successful is I talk a lot about my own failures, my own insecurities, my own fears, and all the different stuff that's happening to me on a daily moment-to-moment basis. And I think that makes me relatable versus to the podcaster that I mentioned before of kind of being in their own head, thinking that people listen to the podcast because of them and not their guests. They start to minimize some of that stuff. They start to focus on other things. And, for me, I just think it's about moving forward, going to that next level in my own life, in my business, in my podcast, in my relationship with other people. And the podcast is literally, it's a daily reminder of that. So I'm not sure if I answered your question 100%, but really I think by far it's been the greatest thing that I've ever decided to do. And that's why whenever people ask me for advice for the podcast that don't have podcasts, I just say, start now, perfect it later. Yeah. And, I wish I started to do this earlier.
Yeah. And I think it's incredible that because of the people that you're interviewing who are sharing all of their experiences and perspectives and advice, you're in this really unique position to gather all that up and you said apply it to yourself, so that I totally understand when you're saying that you are a human 2.0 because, you're learning from the best of the best. So it only makes sense if you're taking that advice and what you're learning and using it to improve yourself and reach your potential.
Yeah, absolutely. The mission and the vision it's always evolving. But, I think for me, just sort of the main thing is my life purpose and what I want to accomplish in this world is really just, helping people become more accountable and figuring out their own mental health, because there's that word mental health, but I really like to refer to it as mental wellness, because to me, in my eyes, that's sort of like the root thing. That's the root problem. Like if you get your mental wellness around, you're probably going to be making more money. You're probably going to be happier. You're probably going to be able to help other people in need. So that to me is something that I'm trying to do. I'm doing that through a variety of different things. At the very beginning stages, I'm doing it through this podcast. I have a business. I'm in the middle of starting an organization that's going to tackle mental wellness called Metamorphosis that has very big ambitious plans to tackle some of the really audacious problems in this field. But ultimately, to me, I think like living your ideal life for me is just like going after the biggest thing. Cause I mean, for me, it's just like, what's the point? Like I'm going to die either way, or maybe I don't know. But to me, it's just like going after the biggest, highest cause that I could possibly go after. And in my eyes, that is mental wellness and looking at people's internal enemy and looking at different rates of suicide, addiction, anxiety, depression, because, you know, I was once really in that boat and I know how horrible it is. And I didn't see an alternative when I was in that kind of darkness. And I just want people to maybe understand that too. Yeah. So that's that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's so exciting to see that you've got that planned for the near future. That's really cool. Wow.
Yeah.
So how can people get in touch with you to learn more about your work or to listen to the Humans 2.0 podcast?
Yeah. So just look up Humans 2.0 anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I'm very accessible. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Kind of my main hubs are LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. My name is Mark Metry, MarkMetry. You can email me, mark@vudream.com. I'd love to hear more from you. Let me know how this interview went. And yeah, and one final thing I'll say is, if you're listening to this podcast right now, make sure you go to Caroline's podcast, the one you're listening to now, and make sure you go on iTunes and leave her a 5-star review. I'm sure she would appreciate it. And I'm sure I would really appreciate it because she works really hard, and having a podcast is not the easiest thing to do. And I think it's a really admirable thing to do. So yeah, get out there and leave that review for Caroline's podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, reviews, everything helps. And I'm so grateful for all my listeners and everyone who listens to the podcast. And thank you again, Mark. It was so exciting to hear your story. Really loved understanding more about what it really means to be a human 2.0. Anyone has the ability to find their inner potential. It's just a matter of really having those tools and the right mindset. And I think that your podcast and a lot of the work that you're doing will really help more people become humans 2.0. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very kind of you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend, give us a shout out on your social media, or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.